He had spent millions on the best doctors in the world, specialists, clinical trials, experimental treatments. Every medical door was open, and everyone closed the same way. His son still lived in silence. Then, on a cold winter night, a homeless girl offered him a small bottle of liquid on the street. No science, no promises, just faith. One sip changed everything. Night fell gently over the city, wrapping its glass towers and glittering streets in a cold December hush. The kind of cold that slipped through coats and settled deep in the bones. Inside the luxury sedan gliding through traffic, warmth hummed softly, scented faintly with leather and pine from the small Christmas ornament hanging from the rearview mirror. Marcus Thornton stared out the window, watching the city blur past. It was all familiar, too familiar. He'd built much of it himself. Buildings bearing his company's name, hospitals funded by his foundation, streets he'd walked as a younger man, hungry for success. Yet tonight, none of it mattered. Beside him sat his son, Ethan. Ethan was 7 years old, small for his age, his dark hair neatly combed, his hands resting quietly in his lap. His eyes, large and observant, reflected the passing lights like distant stars. He leaned slightly toward his father, as he always did, not because he could hear him, but because he liked to feel close. Marcus glanced at him, his chest tightening in that familiar way. The ache never really went away. It just learned how to live quietly inside him. Ethan had been born into unimaginable wealth. Private doctors had stood by the crib the moment he entered the world. Specialists followed within weeks. But when Ethan didn't respond to sound, when he didn't cry at loud noises or startle at claps, the silence settled in. Diagnosis followed diagnosis. Profound hearing loss, vocal impairment. The words had been delivered gently, professionally, but they'd landed like blows. Marcus had refused to accept them. Money had always solved problems before. If not immediately, then eventually. He flew Ethan across continents, from sleek clinics in Switzerland to cutting-edge research centers in Japan. He funded experimental treatments, sponsored entire labs, paid experts to rethink what they believed was impossible. Nothing worked. Ethan learned to communicate through sign language quickly and brilliantly. He smiled easily, he laughed soundlessly. He was happy, mostly, but Marcus noticed the moments Ethan didn't smile. When children spoke to one another and Ethan watched from the outside, when laughter rippled through a room and never reached him, when bedtime stories were read with moving lips and silent pages, Marcus would give everything he owned, every building, every dollar, every ounce of power, just to hear his son say one word. Tonight was the Thornton Industries annual charity gala, a grand affair meant to celebrate generosity and progress. Marcus usually sent representatives, but this year Ethan had asked to go, so here they were. The car slowed as it approached the hotel entrance, where lights blazed and cameras flashed. Well-dressed guests laughed beneath heaters, glasses of champagne catching the glow. Valets hurried back and forth. Marcus adjusted his cufflinks, then glanced at Ethan. "We'll just stay for a bit," he said out of habit. Though he knew his son wouldn't hear the words, he signed it instead, his movements practiced but imperfect. Ethan smiled and nodded. As they stepped out into the cold, the contrast hit immediately. Warmth spilled from the open doors of the hotel, while just beyond the bright circle of luxury, the sidewalk faded into shadow. That was where she was. Huddled near the edge of the building, wrapped in a threadbare coat that had seen far better days, sat a young woman. She couldn't have been more than 19. Her dark hair was pulled back messily, strands escaping to frame a pale, tired face. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from cold. Beside her was a small backpack. In her lap she cradled something unusual, a bottle. It was old, glass worn smooth, with a cork stopper tied by a fraying string. Inside sloshed a small amount of amber liquid. It caught the streetlight strangely, glowing warm and soft, almost alive. Marcus would have walked past her. He'd walked past hundreds like her before, thousands. Poverty existed in every city, even this one. He donated millions to fight it. He couldn't stop for every face, every outstretched hand. But as they drew closer, the girl lifted her head. Her eyes met Ethan's. Something changed. She stood quickly, nearly stumbling as she did, and stepped forward just enough to be seen, but not enough to block their path. "Please," she said, her voice rough, unused. I don't want money." Marcus's body tensed automatically. I saw your boy," she continued, glancing at Ethan, then back to Marcus. I think he might need this." She held out the bottle with both hands like an offering. Marcus barely spared it a glance. Every alarm inside him rang. Scam. Desperation, another person trying to sell false hope to a parent who would give anything. "No," he said sharply. "We're not interested." He turned to guide Ethan forward, but Ethan didn't move. Instead, the boy tugged gently at Marcus's sleeve. Marcus paused, surprised. He looked down. Ethan was signing quickly, his small hands urgent, his expression serious. "Papa," he signed, "please stop." Marcus frowned and knelt slightly to see him better. "Why?" Ethan pointed to the girl, then touched his chest. "Her eyes are kind," he signed carefully. "She's not lying." Marcus followed Ethan's gaze back to the young woman. She stood silently now, shoulders drawn inward as if bracing herself for rejection. She wasn't smiling, she wasn't pleading. There was no rehearsed speech, no dramatic story spilling out, just hope, fragile and trembling. Against his better judgment, Marcus straightened. "What is it?" he asked her, his tone guarded. She swallowed. "I don't know exactly," she said honestly. "My grandmother made it. She called it listener's tears." Marcus's skepticism deepened. "She was a healer," the girl continued, "from a small village near the mountains. She used herbs, water from a spring. She said, 'Listen to the earth.'" She gave a small, embarrassed shrug. "I know how it sounds." Marcus folded his arms. "My little brother," she went on, her voice softer now. "He couldn't hear, not until he was 5. Doctors said it wouldn't change. She gave him this, just once." She met Marcus's eyes again. "And then he heard me cry." The street noise hummed around them. Laughter from the gala, music drifting faintly from inside. Marcus stared at her, searching for deception. There was none, only a girl with nothing but a bottle, and the courage to offer it. Marcus remained still, the girl's words echoing louder in his mind than the traffic around them. He had heard every miracle story imaginable over the years. Parents and strangers alike had approached him with potions, prayers, devices, and promises. Each one had carried hope. Each one had ended in disappointment. And yet something about this moment felt different. "Where did you get this?" Marcus asked, his voice low, controlled. "My grandmother," the girl replied immediately. "Before she died, she told me to keep it safe. Said one day I'd meet someone who needed it more than we did." Marcus let out a quiet breath through his nose. That alone should have ended the conversation. Vague stories, mysticism, coincidences too perfect to be real. He glanced at Ethan again. His son was watching the bottle intently, eyes following the way the amber liquid shifted inside as the girl's hands trembled. Ethan reached out slowly, stopping just short of touching it, as if waiting for permission. Marcus felt something twist inside his chest. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sarah," she said. "Sarah Chen." "Where is your brother now?" Marcus pressed. She hesitated. "He's gone. An accident. 2 years ago." Her fingers tightened around the bottle. "But he heard. For 2 years he heard everything." The words weren't dramatic, they weren't polished. They fell out like memories she carried carefully, afraid they might shatter if handled too roughly. Marcus studied her face again, the dark circles under her eyes, the thinness of her coat, the way she stood, ready to flee at the slightest rejection. This was not someone looking to profit. "If this is a trick," Marcus said quietly, "you understand what you're asking of me." Sarah nodded. "I do. That's why I didn't want money." She gestured weakly toward the gala behind him. "I know who you are. I looked you up when I saw your son's sign. I almost didn't come over." "Then why did you?" Marcus asked. She looked at Ethan, really looked at him. "Because no child should grow up in silence if there's even a small chance they don't have to." The wind cut sharper then, tugging at coats and dresses. A valet glanced at them impatiently, but Marcus barely noticed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a $100 bill, extending it toward her. "For your time." Sarah's eyes widened immediately. She shook her head and gently pushed his hand back. 20, she said firmly. "That's enough for tonight's shelter. The rest, only if it works." Marcus froze. No one had ever refused his money like that. Slowly, he folded the bill, pulled out a 20 and handed it to her instead. Then, with a careful movement, he took the bottle from her hands. The glass felt cool. He turned it slightly, watching the liquid swirl. It smelled faintly of earth and something floral when he loosened the cork just enough to check. "You don't even know what's in it," he said. Sarah nodded. "I know what it did." Marcus looked at Ethan again. His son was watching him now, eyes bright with anticipation and fear all at once. "I want to try," Ethan signed softly. Marcus swallowed hard. "All right," he said at last. "Thank you." Sarah's face crumpled with relief. She stepped back quickly as if afraid to linger. "I hope," she said quietly, "that it gives him something good." Marcus nodded once. They walked inside, warmth enveloping them instantly, but Marcus barely felt it. His focus was entirely on the small bottle now tucked safely into his coat pocket. It felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried more than liquid. Throughout the gala, Marcus was distracted. Donors approached him, board members congratulated him, cameras flashed, glasses clinked. He smiled, he nodded. He played the part he'd mastered long ago, but every few moments his hand drifted to his pocket. Ethan stayed close to him, unusually quiet even by his standards. His fingers moved restlessly, signing questions Marcus didn't answer. They left early. The drive home felt longer than usual. Snow began to fall softly, dusting the city in white. Marcus watched it through the window, lost in thought. What if it was nothing? What if it hurt Ethan? What if it worked? He didn't realize his hands were shaking until the car stopped at the gates of their estate. Inside the house, everything was still. Staff had already retired for the night. Lights glowed warmly, familiar and safe. Marcus sat on the edge of Ethan's bed, the bottle resting on the nightstand between them. Ethan sat cross-legged, watching it like it might disappear if he blinked. Marcus picked it up again. He turned it over, examining every scratch in the glass, every imperfection. This bottle had been carried by a grandmother, protected by a girl with nothing, passed along without certainty or reward. This could be foolish. Marcus signed slowly. It might not do anything. Ethan nodded. It might not work, Marcus continued. Another nod. Ethan reached out and placed his small hand over Marcus's. But what if it does? Ethan signed. Marcus closed his eyes. He thought of every doctor who had shaken their head, every report that ended with unlikely. Every night he'd stood in doorways listening to silence where a child's voice should be. He handed the bottle to Ethan. The boy took it with both hands, his grip steady. Before Marcus could say another word, Ethan pulled out the cork and drank. The liquid disappeared in a single swallow. Marcus's heart slammed into his chest as he lunged forward, too late to stop it. The bottle slipped from Ethan's hands and rolled softly against the bedpost, empty. For a brief, terrifying moment, nothing happened. Ethan blinked once, then again. Marcus held his breath, every muscle in his body locked tight. He searched Ethan's face for any sign of pain, discomfort, fear, anything. "Ethan," Marcus said aloud before he remembered. The room was silent. The old grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily, its sound muted through thick walls. Snow brushed against the windows in soft whispers. Then Ethan stiffened. His eyes widened, pupils dilating as if the world had suddenly rushed closer. His small hands flew to his ears, pressing against them hard. Marcus's panic surged. "Ethan," he signed urgently, "what do you feel?" Ethan's breathing quickened. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again, as if testing something invisible. His brow furrowed in concentration, confusion flickering across his face. He looked around the room slowly. The lamp hummed faintly. The fire crackled downstairs. The clock ticked. Ethan gasped. He staggered off the bed, grabbing Marcus's arm to steady himself. His lips trembled, and tears welled suddenly in his eyes, not from pain, but from overwhelm. Marcus's own vision blurred. Ethan's mouth moved again. No sound came at first, just breath. Then, uncertain and fragile, a whisper broke the silence. "Pa!" Marcus froze. Ethan swallowed hard, his voice shaking, cracking under the weight of something new and enormous. "Papa?" The word landed like an earthquake. Marcus's knees buckled. He dropped to the floor, hands bracing against the carpet as a sob tore from his chest. He didn't try to stop it. Years of restraint, of controlled composure, shattered in that single moment. He reached for Ethan, pulling him into his arms, holding him as if the boy might disappear if he loosened his grip. "You heard me," Marcus whispered, his voice breaking. "You heard me." Ethan laughed, an unfamiliar, untrained sound that burst out of him in uneven waves. He pressed his ear against Marcus's chest, listening to the thudding heartbeat beneath. "It's loud," he said, wonder filling every syllable. "Everything is loud." Marcus laughed and cried at the same time, kissing Ethan's hair, his cheeks, his hands. "I'm here," Marcus said over and over. "I'm here." They stayed like that for a long time, father and son wrapped together, letting the world sound itself into existence. Eventually, Ethan pulled back, wiping his eyes clumsily. "Papa," he said slowly, carefully forming each word. "The girl." Marcus nodded, already knowing. "Yes," he said, "the girl." The bottle lay forgotten near the bed, its purpose fulfilled. Marcus tucked Ethan in that night, though neither of them slept much. Ethan asked him to talk, about anything, about everything. Marcus spoke until his throat ached. He talked about Ethan's first steps, about his mother, about the stars, about how proud he was. Ethan listened with fierce concentration, as if afraid the sounds might vanish if he didn't hold on to them tightly. Near dawn, Ethan finally drifted into sleep, one small hand still curled around Marcus's finger. Marcus sat there until morning. At first light, he made a call. "Find her," he told his head of security. "The girl from last night. Sarah Chen. She mentioned a shelter." Within an hour, they found her. Sarah sat in the shelter cafeteria, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea. She flinched when two men in suits approached her table. I didn't do anything wrong," she said quickly, standing up. "I told the truth, I swear." "Please don't be afraid," one of them said gently. "Mr. Thornton just wants to speak with you." Her heart pounded as she was escorted to a black car. She stared out the window the entire drive, bracing herself for disappointment or accusation. When they arrived at Thornton Industries, the glass building rose before her like something from another world. She was led into a conference room so large it made her feel small. She sat at the edge of a long table, hands folded tightly in her lap. The door opened. Marcus entered, holding Ethan's hand. The moment Ethan saw her, his face lit up. He broke free and ran to her, throwing his arms around her waist. "Thank you," he said clearly, his voice still raw but strong. "Thank you for my voice." Sarah froze. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. She knelt and hugged him back, shaking with emotion. "It worked," she whispered. "It really worked." Marcus watched them, his own eyes wet. "I'm not here to interrogate you," he said softly when Sarah finally looked up. "I'm here to understand." She nodded, wiping her face. "My grandmother was a healer," she said again. "She believed the body listens when you give it the right chance." Marcus placed the bottle on the table between them. "Our scientists will want to study this," he said. "But before that, I want to ask you something." Sarah tensed. "What can I give you in return?" She shook her head immediately. "Nothing. I didn't do it for that." "You gave my son the world," Marcus said. "Let me give you a future." Sarah hesitated, then whispered, "I just want to learn. I want to understand what she knew." Marcus smiled. "Then we will." Sarah sat quietly in the sleek sunlit office of the Thornton Foundation, a world away from the shelter where she had spent the previous years. The hum of computers, the soft clatter of keyboards, and the occasional murmur of colleagues discussing projects felt foreign at first, but she quickly adapted. For the first time in her life, she belonged somewhere she could make a difference. Marcus had given her a choice: a large financial settlement, an apartment, and the freedom to pursue her own path, or a full scholarship to any university she desired with a position at the foundation managing healthcare initiatives for the homeless. She had chosen education. Knowledge, she realized, would let her help more people than money ever could. Ethan visited often, his energy boundless now that sound had opened the world to him. He would run into her office, bouncing on his toes, chattering endlessly. He told her about the stories he was learning to read aloud, the music he was discovering, and every sound that fascinated him. His laughter became a soundtrack to her days. Sarah began her studies immediately. She immersed herself in everything from human physiology to herbal medicine. Marcus ensured she had access to the finest laboratories and mentors. Every evening, she would send Ethan a quick video call, showing him diagrams, samples, or simply waving and smiling as he practiced reading lips. Her research soon focused on the mysterious liquid. The listener's tears, as her grandmother had called it, was unlike anything she had seen before. Initial analysis revealed compounds derived from rare mountain herbs combined with pure spring water, but there was something more, a subtle, undetectable interaction within the liquid that seemed to stimulate auditory nerve function. Months passed. Sarah's experiments were delicate, painstaking. Every test, every trial was a step into the unknown, but with Marcus providing resources, her university professors guiding her, and Ethan's excitement fueling her, breakthroughs came faster than she could have imagined. One chilly afternoon, as snow dusted the city in light white, Sarah observed her first successful synthesis in a lab. A tiny vial, no larger than the one Marcus had first held, glowed faintly as she ran a sequence of auditory cells through it. The cells responded, signaling activity that no known stimulant could provoke. Tears sprang to her eyes. She had recreated a fraction of her grandmother's miracle. Marcus entered the lab quietly, smiling. "You've done it," he said simply. Sarah turned, laughing and crying at once. I think we've actually done it." Ethan ran into the lab, nearly tripping over the rug. "Does it work?" he asked eagerly, bouncing on the balls of his feet. "Yes," Sarah said, kneeling to his level. "It works." The breakthrough made headlines. Within weeks, the liquid's compounds were studied by leading scientists, its properties carefully documented. Sarah ensured that everything her grandmother had taught her, every secret hidden in the small Tibetan village, was respected and shared responsibly. She refused to allow it to be monetized recklessly. Children in need would receive help first. By the time Ethan turned 11, Sarah had earned her medical degree. She stood at a podium at a global conference on auditory health, presenting her findings. The room was packed. Leading doctors and researchers listened, captivated as she explained the intricacies of her discovery and the story behind it. At the edge of the stage, Ethan sat proudly, holding a sign that read, "Thank you, Sarah." Tears welled in the audience. This was more than science. It was a story of hope, of perseverance, and of a girl who had nothing, giving everything she could to change a life. Back at the Thornton estate, Marcus watched Ethan sleep one night, the boy's hand curled around a stuffed animal. He thought back to the night Sarah had handed over the bottle and how fragile hope had seemed then. Now hope had multiplied, rippling outward, touching hundreds, then thousands, then potentially millions. Sarah had changed more than his son's life. She had changed theirs all, Marcus included. He realized that the truest investments weren't counted in dollars or deals, but in lives transformed. And Sarah? She had found more than success. She had found purpose, family, and a chance to honor her grandmother's legacy. The world she had entered timidly, afraid and unsure, had now become a place where she could thrive, guiding others to hear the world in ways she had once thought impossible. Yet even in all the accolades, Sarah remained humble. Each time a new child heard for the first time, she remembered the night on the cold sidewalk, the amber liquid glowing softly in her hands, and the small boy who had tugged at his father's sleeve. That moment had defined her path, a reminder that even in nothingness, the smallest act of hope could ignite miracles. Ethan often asked her to tell the story of the bottle, and she always did, embellishing slightly to make him giggle. But she never added anything that wasn't true, that a young girl with nothing but a bottle and a heart full of courage had given a voice to a boy who had never known sound, and along the way had found her own voice in the world. Years passed, yet the memory of that cold December night never faded for Marcus, Ethan, or Sarah. Each carried it quietly, like a secret seed that had grown into something extraordinary. Ethan, now 12, had become a young advocate for deaf and hard-of-hearing children. His newfound voice had given him confidence, but more importantly, it had given him purpose. He spoke at schools, community centers, and even small conferences, sharing his story with warmth and sincerity that captivated every listener. His experience inspired parents and children alike, showing that hope could exist even in the darkest corners. Sarah worked tirelessly alongside him, her life a seamless blend of research, teaching, and mentorship. The Thornton Foundation had built a dedicated wing for her auditory research, where she trained young scientists and doctors in both modern medicine and traditional healing methods. Her discoveries were expanding rapidly. New compounds derived from the original listener's tears were helping children with hearing loss in ways previously thought impossible. Each success reinforced her belief that her grandmother's wisdom was a treasure meant to be shared. One evening, Marcus watched them in the laboratory. Ethan was reading aloud to a group of children, some with hearing aids, some learning sign language, all listening intently. Sarah guided them gently, her hands moving gracefully as she explained how sound travels through the ear, how the liquid worked at a cellular level, and how hope and care were as important as science. Marcus felt a lump in his throat. The boy who had once only communicated through signs now stood before dozens, speaking clearly, confidently, and joyfully. And the girl who had been nothing but a fragile presence on a snowy street had become a force that changed the world. After the children had left, Ethan ran up to Sarah, his face glowing with excitement. "Look what we did today. We helped 3 more kids here." Sarah laughed, crouching to his level. "Yes, we did, and tomorrow we'll help even more." Her eyes softened as she looked at him. "You know, none of this would have happened if you hadn't trusted me that night." Ethan smiled. "You trusted me first," he corrected gently, then hugged her tightly. Marcus approached quietly, standing behind them. He smiled, thinking about the journey from that single bottle in the cold night to this very moment. "You've given him, and all of them, a world I never thought possible," he said softly, his voice carrying gratitude he could not contain. "And you've given me hope I didn't know I needed." Sarah shook her head. "I didn't do it alone. Your son did most of the believing, and so did you eventually." They were quiet for a moment, the kind of silence that feels full of everything: love, accomplishment, and the echoes of the past. Later that night, Sarah returned to her apartment carrying a small notebook filled with observations and research notes. She paused by the window, looking out at the city lights, reflecting on the snow-covered streets. She thought of her grandmother, and a warm, familiar comfort filled her chest. The gift she had been entrusted with had not only healed but had inspired a lifetime of purpose. And somewhere deep inside, she felt her grandmother's quiet pride. Back at the Thornton estate, Marcus sat beside Ethan's bed once more. The boy was brushing his hair, practicing reading aloud from a book Marcus had brought him. "Papa," Ethan said softly, "do you remember the bottle?" Marcus nodded, smiling. "I remember it like it was yesterday." Ethan's eyes sparkled. "I'll never forget it, and I'll never forget her." Marcus kissed his son's forehead. "Neither will I." Over time, the story of listeners' tears became more than just a legend in their household. Sarah published her findings, carefully documenting the origins, properties, and ethical guidelines for its use. Children around the world began to receive treatments derived from her work, and as each child experienced the miracle of hearing, the story of a girl with nothing but a bottle continued to inspire millions. People wrote letters, shared videos, and visited the foundation to meet the woman who had started it all. Sarah never sought fame. She didn't desire the spotlight or accolades. Her joy came from watching children speak their first words, from hearing laughter that once belonged only to silence. And every time she saw Ethan, she was reminded of the boy who had looked at her with hope in his eyes, trusting that a stranger could be the answer to a lifelong silence. Marcus often reflected on that moment on the sidewalk, a memory that had started it all. He realized that even billions of dollars could not create miracles, but courage, kindness, and trust could. He had learned that the greatest gifts were never material. They were the lives touched, the dignity restored, and the hope renewed. And Sarah? She had learned that sometimes the smallest person with the least could give the world the most. On a crisp morning, 4 years after that first meeting, Sarah stood at the podium in front of a global medical conference. Ethan sat beside her, holding her hand as she addressed the audience. "This is more than science," she said. "It is proof that hope, love, and courage can change lives in ways no wealth can match." The audience erupted in applause. Ethan turned to her, whispering, "We did it." Sarah smiled, tears in her eyes. "Yes, we did." And so, the girl with nothing but a bottle had given the gift of sound, the boy had learned the power of belief, and together they changed the world, one life at a time.